Today I thought I'd talk a little bit about what is one of my favorite workouts, and that is progression runs. And I personally really like progression runs, but I find a lot of people don't use them. So let's talk a little bit about what is a progression run, why would you want to use it. Obviously, progression is like the name sounds. You progress. In this particular case, you're getting faster through the run. Technically speaking, a progression run is typically going to cover two zones of training. We've got three zones. I'll get to that in a moment. So a really true progression run is going to have you in one zone and then get you in another zone. You could do it all within one zone, but generally speaking, you're going to cross zones. So you have three zones of training. You've got easy recovery runs, long runs, marathon pace runs, easy runs. You've got moderate, steady state, tempo, half marathon pace. You get your hard runs, VO2 max, intervals, sprints, strides. Those are your three zones of training. Typically, you're going to start in the easy zone and work your way into the moderate zone for a progression run. I guess in theory, you could be starting in moderate and working your way into hard. I don't know if I've ever seen that, but it would still meet the criteria. But most commonly, you're going to be starting easy and working your way into moderate. Why would we do progression runs? Way more reasons than I just have on a simple paper, but it gives you some variety. You know, if you're supposed to go out and run an 8:30 pace for 7 miles, well, there's a bit of a grind behind that, and that's okay, 8:30, 8:30, 8:30, but having some variety in there, I just think makes the workout more interesting. It helps teach pace control because you're changing the pace, and you're paying attention to that pace, and you're working that down, and almost everybody says, well, how do I get better at pacing in a race? Well, part of it is you got to get better at pacing in practice, and you need to train to that. It lets us sneak in a little bit more effort. As I said, you're typically going from the easy zone to the moderate zone, but not for very long. So it's not like we need to have this big recovery after a progression run that you might need to have after a tempo one or some track work. So we can sneak in a little bit more hard work, but you don't really need to recover from it. It's great for mental preparation because you're running, it's towards the end of the run, you're calling your body to go faster. That's exactly what happens in the race. As you're getting tired, you got to call on your body to go faster. And the beautiful thing of the progression run is typically those faster miles, there's not very many of them. So it's like, well, I can do this for a mile, I can do this for 2 miles, or whatever it is. So it really helps with your brain training to push through that a little bit. So here's an example of what a progression run might look like. Now, the paces I'm going to use, obviously paces are all over the board. Could be 7 minutes, it could be 12 minutes, depends upon you as an individual. I've got 5 miles, 3 miles, etc. It doesn't have to be that. It's just an example, but it could be you're going to do 5 miles at 8-minute pace. Then you're going to take 3 miles at 7:45, then a mile at 7:30, then maybe another mile at just under 7:30, and then a cool down. Because anytime you're doing running in the moderate zone or the hard zone, you always want to have some cool down after that. As I said, paces are an example, miles are the example. This particular one has you running about, 10.5, 11 miles by the time you get the cool down in. It could be a 6-mile progression run. It doesn't have to be this. The point being, moving from easy to moderate, getting a little bit of cool down done. Now, progression runs can be done anytime in your training. There's no special place they have to be. I will tell you, I like them best in the final 4 weeks of training. I like to see the rest of the time spent on training really getting into a particular zone and spending time there, whether it be the moderate zone, the easy zone, the hard zone, whatever, and progression goes through that. But when you get to those final weeks, it's a good way to start getting that tune-up, feeling the pace, getting in a little bit harder work, getting that mental preparation for the race. So typically, if I'm doing progression runs, I'll also maybe do 3 or 4 of them over the course of a month and progress them a little bit. So this example where, 5 miles at 8, well, maybe another time it's going to be 4 miles at 8, but then 4 miles at 7:45. So you try and inch them up a little bit, make them just a little bit more challenging. Just a couple more keys on progression runs. To the extent you can, you want to run them straight through. You don't want to be taking breaks. Now, obviously, if it's hot and humid, you need to hydrate, but try and hydrate quickly. If you can't carry and get going again, stoplights, things like that, you certainly have to do that. But ideally, this isn't something where you want to take a rest break. You want to try and run it straight through. That's part of your mental preparation. And control the pace, because this is also trying to help you with that pacing. So if your goal was 5 miles at about 8, then try and keep it at about 5 miles about 8. Resist the urge, let that go faster, or slower, as the case might be. So try and control that pace. So that's a little bit about progression runs. If you're not trying those, I would suggest you try those, especially in those final 4 weeks before your key race, and see if that helps you race a little better.